In the world of anomalies, there are some cases even the most skeptic get convinced. Most of us watch horror movies, get scared, then make comforting comments like, "It's just a movie," to get us through them. What if the events were actually inspired by a true story? Number 5. The Perron Family Haunting. The 2013 film The Conjuring is based on the Perron family in their haunted farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The Perron family haunting was an investigation done by Ed and Lorraine Warren, who had been conducting investigations into paranormal activities since the 1950s. Roger and Carolyn Perron purchased their dream home in the winter of 1970 and moved in with their 5 children to the quieter home life in the countryside. The family began to notice something wasn't right from the first day they stepped into their home. Carolyn seemed to have received most of the ghostly attention. She describes one of her earliest encounters in an interview with the Providence Journal, saying she awoke to a woman wearing a gray dress, her head hanging off to the side as a voice reverberated, "Get out, get out, I'll drive you out with death and gloom." This was accompanied by levitating beds, floating households, and unusual noises in the night. The worst of the haunting only came when Carolyn was tormented by an evil entity from within. The ghost, known as Bathsheba, was thought to have resided in the house in the early 19th century, and was a witch and practiced Satanism. She is thought to have died after hanging herself from a tree behind the barn. In the beginning, Carolyn would be pinched, slapped, or have objects being thrown at her. At one point, the ghost learned of her greatest fear, fire, and occasionally used it against her. The ghost wanted Carolyn out of the house. The treatment grew harsher with time, as in one instance, Carolyn was lying on the couch when she felt excruciating pain in the calf of her leg, which turned out to be a large, bleeding puncture wound that looked as if a large sewing needle had impaled through her skin. As these attempts failed, Bathsheba tried attacking Carolyn from within. The family then believed she was possessed, and that's when they called in psychic investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren to assist them. Number 4. Connecticut Haunting. In 1986, Alan and Carmen Snedeker rented out a house in Southington, Connecticut. They moved in with their daughter and 3 sons. Carmen then found strange items in the basement while touring the house, tools used by morticians. In the 1920s, the house used to be a mortuary called the Hallahan Funeral Home. There also existed a graveyard and corpse photographs within the drawers. The family claimed to have been haunted by spirits within the house not long after moving in. They regularly experienced a malevolent force that would take different forms and sometimes slap, threaten, or otherwise freak them out. They also reported seeing figures of dead people. The son, Philip, had cancer of the immune system, and that's why the family moved closer to the hospital where he was being treated. Young Philip started seeing a young man with long hair all the way down to his hips. He would talk to Philip every day since then, and sometimes threaten him. During the course of his treatment, Philip's cancer went into complete remission. He sometimes played cruel jokes to the family members. For instance, he once locked his younger brother in a chest and then forgot it ever happened. Philip was also diagnosed with schizophrenia after he talked about the spirits who he claimed were talking to him. Carmen also claimed that at one point when she was cleaning the basement floor, the water turned red and smelled of decaying flesh. She also stated the dishes used to put themselves away and the lights would flicker on and off, even if they removed the light bulbs. 2 decades later, the time she and her family spent in that creepy old house became the aspiration of the surprise hit movie, The Haunting in Connecticut. People have a lot of doubts about Carmen and Alan's ghost claims because a lot of the reports say that their stories have a lot of contradictions. According to Susan Trotter Smith, the current owner of the home, the house is not haunted now and never was. Number 3. London's Demonic Werewolf. The story of Bill Ramsey, which went on to be called the Southend Werewolf, began in the Essex seaside of Southend, England on a Saturday afternoon in 1952. As a very imaginative 9-year-old boy, he would spend hours playing in the backyard of their home. On this day, he had been out at the movies watching films about World War II pilots. He then went back home, lost in his wild imaginations, played tirelessly for an hour until suddenly he felt a sensation of coldness running down his entire body and a foul, nauseating odor. After the experience, his usual amusing games began to seem so childish. He freaked out at the people around him. Children were never allowed to play with him. At one point, he wondered what was happening around him. His temperature dropped when he saw pictures of him as a wolf running through his mind. He felt rage, directed all of his anger toward the fence post, then uprooted it from its position. He hurled the fence post upon the ground, then tore brutally at the wired fence with his bare hands and teeth. The rage had overpowered him. He growled like an angry wolf, causing his parents to flee the scene very frightened. The rage suddenly faded away, and then he was back to the young 9-year-old boy. His parents opened him the door reluctantly. Everyone avoided the story, and no one ever spoke about it again. Bill then lived a normal life. He married, had a girl child, and earned an honest living through carpentry. But on the night of December 5th, 1983, Bill was driving towards the cab company when he suddenly felt a tremendous pain in his chest. His breaths irregular and whole body covered in a cold sweat. He then rushed to a nearby hospital, staggering through the long hospital corridors when he suddenly gave out a shuddersome roar, followed by another. The nurses jumped back with fear. In the course of the events, he got a hold of one of the nurses and bit her near the elbow, causing blood to drip off of her hand. A young policeman happened to be nearby, rushed to help, and was surprised to find a beastly man gripping the nurse into his arms, with his eyes screaming violence. Bill, of course, remembered none of this when he regained consciousness. He then underwent exorcism which normalized him. He felt purified and unburdened. Number 2. The Amityville Horror. This is a 1979 horror classic based on a true story. The story begins with the DeFeo family, who lived in a house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. On November 13, 1974, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., a 23-year-old, took his father's shotgun and wiped out his family one by one, beginning with his parents, moving on to his 2 younger brothers, then shot dead his 2 younger sisters. Butch cleaned himself up, then left his whole family dead in their beds. He then went to work as usual. At the end of the day, he went back home, then walked into a local bar, screaming that his whole family had been murdered. The bartender called the police reporting the murders. Police and reporters soon mobbed the scene, found 5 dead bodies face down in their beds with no sign of a struggle. Butch was the only surviving member. The following day, an officer found a box containing the murder weapon in Butch's bedroom. He was arrested, denied at first, but he later confessed to committing the murders. On December 18, 1975, the DeFeo family home found new occupants, the Lutz family. According to the family, within days of moving into the house, they began experiencing supernatural phenomenon. Their claims include strange noises, unexplained foul odors, and slime oozing from the walls. George claimed he frequently woke up in the night to sounds of gunshots and music playing. Their daughter Missy, who never had an idea about the murders, had an imaginary friend named Jody, the same name as one of the DeFeo daughters. The family got frightened. They fled the house within 28 days of moving in, leaving behind all of their belongings. Number 1. The Annabelle Case. In 1970, a mother bought an antique Raggedy Ann doll from a hobby shop. This was a birthday present for her daughter, who was then a college student, preparing to graduate with a nursing degree, and lived with her friend Angie, a nurse too, in a tiny apartment. Pleased with her present, Donna placed it on her bed. Days later, she realized some odd changes. She noticed the doll would move around the house, often appearing with drops of blood on its dress. About a month into their experiences, Donna and Angie began to find penciled messages on paper that read, "Help us" and "Help Lou," with handwriting appearing like it belonged to a child. Donna and Angie then contacted a medium who strongly believed that a little girl named Annabelle Higgins had possessed the doll. However, events went to a whole new level when the doll seemingly attacked a visiting friend. They then contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, who realized that the doll was being manipulated by a demon. The 2 paranormal investigators then found it necessary for an exorcism blessing to be conducted to cleanse the apartment. The Warrens later took the doll along with them when they left. Annabelle was put into a special case in their occult museum to contain its evil.